right. Good afternoon, everyone. So I wanted to take some time today to make you another video about multiplying and dividing with rational expressions. Obviously, the past 2 days we spent talking about adding and subtracting. One thing I will say, if you haven't submitted your classwork from the other day, please do so, only because it's going to be some free classwork points for you, as well as I'm going to be able to give you some feedback so you'll get a good sense of how you're doing, what you're understanding. I try to write as many comments on there as I can, whether you guys submit a picture or a PDF. I try to write as much as I possibly can, just so that way you get the best feedback that you can get in our less than ideal scenario. So today we're going to make the jump to the other two math operations, right? We did adding and subtracting. Now we're going to do multiplying and dividing, right? So if we take a look at the example that I got here on the screen, right? Pretty standard, right? I got a whole bunch of gibberish out here, a lot of X's. My goal is just to multiply. That's it. Now remember, very similar to addition and subtraction, our final answer is still going to be a fraction. Right, so I'm still going to have one of these rational expressions as a fraction. I'm just going to try and cancel out everything that I possibly can. So, very similar to every other thing we've talked about so far. My step one is going to be factor. I know, you're all incredibly surprised right now. I just know it, even though I'm not there to see it. I know. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do, now you do have to be careful here. We do need to make sure we factor as much as we possibly can. All right, so for my first fraction, this is pretty simple. All right, x minus 7, x plus 5, over. Now for the denominator, I can factor out an x squared. And I have 2x minus 3 times. Now for this numerator, I can only factor out an x. Oops, 4x squared. There we go. Minus 9. And then your denominator, while it may not look like you can factor anything, you can actually take out a 7. And you're left with x minus 7. Amazing, right? Now, if you notice something very important here, right, we have x minus 7. We have x minus 7. That's going to be very, very important, right? However, again, first step here, factor, state you're excluded here as well. This is going to be important later on because things may cancel out, and I don't want you to forget that they still can't be part of your final answer. All right, so for here, what do we get rid of? X can't be 0 from the x squared factor, 3 over 2 from the 2x minus 3, and then x also can't be 7 from the x minus 7 factor. All right, so here's my excluded values. Those are important. Those are going to be the same even if stuff ends up canceling out, which you can see a bunch of stuff is going to cancel out here. However, there's actually one factor I can take one extra step here, and that actually happens to be this guy right here. Some of you may have noticed that right off the bat. If you did, I'm very happy. If not, not a big deal. But that's actually a difference of squares. So if I continue down here, my first fraction, this guy does not change. I have factored this as completely as possible. My second fraction can actually be factored into this. 2x minus 3 and 2x plus 3. Now, if you notice, that's very important because I have a 2x minus 3 in the denominator in the first fraction. Denominator here doesn't change, right? So there's my step one completed. So I hope that wasn't too bad. The only tricky part here is just the difference of squares that shows up, so you just have to be careful. That's all. Now, interestingly enough, there's only 2 steps. And step 2 is cancel. Cancel what you can. Now, it's important to note, to cancel, we just have to be in a numerator and a denominator. It doesn't matter which fraction. So, for example, let's do this in, we'll do this in pink, right? This x minus 7 can cancel with the x minus 7 in the first fraction. So as long as you have the same factor in a numerator and a denominator, they can cancel out. They don't have to be within the same fraction. right? As long as one's on the top and one's on the bottom. In addition, right, this 2x minus 3 can cancel with that 2x minus 3. And, if you're not careful here, this x right here can cancel with one of the ones down here. And there you go. So the only thing left to do is actually write our final answer. Right, so if I'm going to take a snapshot of this here, and I'm going to take this onto the next page for us. Right? So my last step now, I just need to write my final answer here. So what's left over after I cancel this out? Well, I have an x plus 5 in the numerator. I have a 2x plus 3 in the numerator. And then my denominator, I just have 1x and the 7. Now, again, the thing to be careful about, at the very end, state your excluded values. Right, so from the very first step, I know x can't be 0, 3 over 2, or 7. And that's my final answer. So this is no different than multiplying if you had numbers, right? If you have 1/4 times 2 over 5, you can cancel one of the 2's with one of the 4's. It's the same deal. The place where people make mistakes is the excluded value part right here. They forget to actually say what the excluded values are at the end, or they only give me that x can't be 0 because all they do is look at this denominator. So you have to be careful, make sure that you include both. Right, so just a quick recap, right? Factor everything that you can, state your excluded values, right? So far, the first step, no matter the unit, has been the same. Step 2, cancel what you can as long as they're in opposite places in the fraction. And then step 3, I guess you could call this a step 3, right? Is just going to be to write down your final answer with whatever factors are left over, making sure that we're still stating our excluded values at the end. So that's multiplying. Now we're going to go through dividing very quickly because if you remember, dividing with fractions is basically the same thing as multiplying. We just have one extra step. All right, so if I go to my next page here, to divide, remember, when you divide by a fraction, all you're going to do is multiply by the reciprocal. So my first step, right, I treat these division problems exactly like multiplication. So my first step is going to be factor and state excluded. Right, don't forget to do that. Right, so first fraction, x plus 7, x minus 4. Second fraction is x plus 2, or sorry, not second fraction, our first denominator. Now I'm going to leave the divide by. Now I'm going to factor the second expression. So that numerator is just plus 7 minus 7. This denominator is minus 7 plus 2. Now the reason why I did that is you can actually cancel something right away here. Now you don't have to. You don't have to do it in this step, right? But I will, right? That x minus 7 can go away. Step 2 is just going to be, oops. Come on, why are we not writing? There we go. That was weird. All right, so step 2 is just going to be flip the second fraction. It must just be that spot on my iPad. Flip, flip. Give me the L, please. Flip the second. There we go. Flip the second fraction. And multiply. All right, so my first fraction stays the same. My second fraction now, I'm going to flip it, so the x plus 2 comes to the numerator, the x plus 7 goes to the denominator, and my sign here changes from division to multiplication. And now the steps follow exactly the same. I'm going to cancel what I can, so I know one of the x plus 2's go away. I know the x plus 7 goes away. If I was smart, at this step, I would have said x can't be -2 or 7, all right, because that's going to come forward. So my final answer here is just x minus 4 over x plus 2 with my original excluded values. So, sorry about the technical difficulty with me trying to write the L in flip, but other than that, division we treat exactly the same as multiplication, except for I just have to remember that before I multiply, I flip the second fraction. So, I hope that was helpful. We're going to spend the next couple of days doing some practice with this. If you're confused, please let me know. All right, I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.